He was sitting on the bench outside the laundromat every Tuesday morning when Zola arrived to open up. Not asking for anything. Not talking to anyone. Just sitting there in a faded green army jacket, a paper cup of coffee in his hands, watching the street like he was reading a book. Only he could see. The first Tuesday, Zola walked past him and said nothing. The second Tuesday, she nodded. The third Tuesday, she had an extra meat pie from the Ghanaian bakery 2 blocks over. She'd bought 2 by accident, and she stopped. "Here," she said, holding it out. Still warm. The old man looked at the pie, then at her. His eyes were pale gray, clear, the eyes of a man who noticed things. "You sure?" he asked. She had $7 in her wallet and rent due on Friday. She was sure. He took it. "Thank you, young lady." He said it quietly, like he meant it down to the bone. She went inside and opened up the machines, and that was that. Except it wasn't, because he came back the next Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that, and Zola, without ever deciding to, started buying 2 meat pies every week. One for herself, one for the man on the bench. His name, he told her on the 4th week, was Clarence. Just Clarence. Zola Asante was 31 years old, and she ran the coin laundromat on Dufferin Street in Toronto, the way her mother had taught her to run everything, with both hands and no complaints. She had come to Canada from Kumasi when she was 9 years old, tucked between her parents in a plane seat that smelled like recycled air and other people's anxiety. Her father, Kofi, no, not that name. Her father's name was Nana Yaw, had worked nights at a distribution warehouse in Etobicoke for 11 years. Her mother, Abena, a different Abena, her mother's name, had cleaned offices downtown 6 days a week until her knees gave out. They had saved. They had sacrificed. And when Zola was 24, her father had died of a heart attack in the parking lot of that warehouse, still in his reflective vest, still on the clock. After that, her mother's health slid. Slowly at first, then faster. Diabetes, high blood pressure, a hip that needed replacing, and a waiting list 18 months long. Zola had been working as a line cook at a Ghanaian restaurant in Rexdale. Good money, brutal hours, a head chef who treated her like furniture. When her mother couldn't climb the stairs to their apartment anymore, Zola made a decision. She quit the restaurant. She used the inheritance her father had left, $11,000, the sum of 11 years of night shifts, and she took over the lease on the laundromat from a man named Mr. Park who wanted to retire and move to Barrie. It wasn't a plan. It was a prayer. The laundromat was called Sunny Wash. It had 22 machines, a change dispenser that jammed every 3rd day, a hand-painted mural of sunflowers on the back wall that Zola had done herself on a Sunday afternoon, and a shelf of forgotten single socks that she couldn't bring herself to throw away. She opened at 7. She closed at 9. 6 days a week, she mopped floors and fixed jammed machines and folded the clothes of strangers who left them in the dryers. She paid herself enough to cover groceries and her mother's prescriptions. Some weeks, barely that. Her mother, whose name was Ifua Asante, 63 years old, a woman who had once been a seamstress in Kumasi and still hemmed her own trousers even with arthritic fingers, lived with Zola in the apartment above the laundromat. She moved slowly now. She sat by the window and watched the street and listened to Ghanaian gospel on her phone at a volume that drifted down through the ceiling while Zola worked. "Mama," Zola said one evening, bringing up a bowl of groundnut soup, "you have it on too loud again." Ifua turned it down 2 notches, which was not noticeably quieter. "I'm old," she said. "I'm allowed." Zola sat on the edge of the bed. Her feet. Ifua looked at her. "You didn't eat today." "I ate, Zola. I had a meat pie." "Half a meat pie," her mother said. "I saw you give the other half to that man downstairs. He was hungry, Mama." "And you weren't?" Zola didn't answer. Her mother reached over with her stiff fingers and held her daughter's hand. "Your father," she said quietly, used to give away the last of his lunch to men who worked beside him on the loading dock, men who had less than him. I used to ask him the same thing I'm asking you now, he said. Ifua, a person who eats alone always finishes hungry. I didn't understand it then. Ifua's grip tightened. I understand it now. Zola put her head on her mother's shoulder, and they sat like that, while the gospel music played too loud, and the street outside went about its Tuesday evening business. Clarence came every week. He was, Zola estimated, somewhere between 65 and 75, though there was something about him that made age difficult to pin down. He was white, tall, broad through the shoulders, in a way that suggested he had once been broader. He had white hair kept short, the kind of posture that didn't bend even when he sat, and hands that Zola noticed early. Large, capable hands, the kind that had built things or fixed things, not the hands of a man who had always had nothing. He never asked for the meat pie. He never asked for anything. He sat on the bench, and Zola brought it, and they talked. Not always much. Sometimes just the weather, the transit delays, the new construction on the corner that had been going on for 8 months and showed no signs of stopping. But slowly, over weeks, they went deeper. "You from Ghana?" he asked one morning in early March, cold enough that their breath showed. "I've been here since I was 9. "Kumasi?" She looked at him. "How do you know Kumasi?" He smiled, just at the edges. "I know a few things." He sipped his coffee. "What's your mother like?" "Loud gospel music," Zola said. "Arthritis. The best Contomeyer stew you've ever had." She paused. She came here with nothing and made a life out of it, and never once complained. Not once. Not even when she was cleaning offices at 5 a.m. in February. Clarence was quiet. Then he said, "A woman like that raises a daughter who gives strangers her lunch." "It's a meat pie," Zola said, "not a gourmet meal." He smiled again, full this time. "No," he said, "it's more than that, and you know it." The trouble started in April. His name was Dennis Farrow. He owned the building on Dufferin, where the laundromat sat, and he had owned it for 6 years. And for 6 years he had been a landlord in the precise way that certain landlords are, present only to collect, absent for everything else. The boiler had been patched twice without being replaced. The ventilation above the dryers ran weak in summer and not at all in winter. The ceiling in the back room had a water stain, the shape of the Great Lakes that Zola had photographed and emailed and called about 17 times. She had grown used to this. She hadn't made peace with it, but she had grown used to it. What she had not grown used to was the letter that arrived on a Thursday morning in April, slids under the front door before she had even opened the machines. She read it twice. Then she sat down on the bench where Clarence usually sat. He wasn't there yet, and read it a third time. Dennis Farrow was not renewing her lease. She had 60 days. The reason given was renovation. The building would be undergoing significant improvements. All commercial tenants were being asked to vacate. She had until the end of June. She called his property management office. She was put on hold for 9 minutes and then told that the decision was final. The lease terms permitted 60 days' notice, and there was nothing further to discuss. She looked up the building permit applications online and found nothing about renovation. What she did find, through a neighbor down the street who worked at City Hall, was that a developer had been quietly approaching owners along Dufferin. Condominiums, the kind with white quartz countertops and a rooftop terrace and rents that the neighborhood could not afford. "The laundromat doesn't fit the vision," was what the developer had apparently told the building owners. Zola sat in her laundromat at 7:30 on a Thursday morning, machines humming, the smell of warm fabric and detergent all around her, and felt the floor tilt. Without the laundromat, she had no income. Without income, she could not afford the apartment. Without the apartment, she and her mother, a 63-year-old woman with diabetes and a hip that still needed replacing, had nowhere to go. She did the math over and over and kept arriving at the same number: 0. That Tuesday, when Clarence came, she didn't have the meat pie. She had forgotten, for the first time in months, to stop at the bakery. He sat down beside her on the bench anyway. She told him all of it: the letter, the developer, the 60 days. She didn't cry, but it was a near thing. Clarence listened. He didn't offer platitudes. He didn't say it'll work out, or everything happens for a reason. He listened the way someone listens when they understand that sometimes a person just needs to be heard before they can figure out what to do next. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What does your mother say?" "I haven't told her." "Why not?" "Because she'll worry, and worrying hurts her pressure, and I can't watch her pressure go up and not be able to do anything about it." Clarence nodded slowly. "So you carry it alone?" "I carry what I can carry." He looked at her. "Zola, what would you do if the building wasn't an issue? If you had a real space, a proper space, not a lease you're always afraid of losing?" She almost laughed. "I'd expand. I'd add drop-off service, same-day turnaround. I'd hire 2 people from the neighborhood, women who need flexible hours. I'd set aside 3 machines free of charge for families in the shelter system. There's a women's shelter 4 blocks over. They have nowhere to wash clothes." She stopped. "But that's not the situation." "No," Clarence said. "It's not. Not yet." She looked at him. This man in his faded army jacket, his paper coffee cup, his clear gray eyes. What does that mean? He just looked at the street. "Don't give up yet," he said. "Not yet." Now, before the rest of this story unfolds, if you believe that the people who give quietly deserve to receive loudly, tap subscribe and turn on notifications, because what happens next is the kind of thing that restores your faith in the way the world can work, when the right person is paying attention. What Zola did not know was that the man on the bench had a last name: Whitfield, Clarence Whitfield. And Clarence Whitfield was not a man who had nothing. He was the founder and former chairman of Whitfield Development Corp., one of the oldest and most respected real estate development and property management companies in Ontario. For 40 years, his firm had built and managed commercial and residential properties across Toronto, Hamilton, Kingston, and Ottawa. He had developed affordable housing before it was a trend, green construction before it was a requirement, and community-integrated commercial spaces because he believed, bone deep, that a neighborhood was defined by who it let stay. His net worth, last assessed, was in the range of $900 million. He had a house in Rosedale, an office in the financial district that he no longer visited, a cottage on Lake Huron, and a son in Vancouver who called every Sunday. His wife, Margaret, had died 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end, so fast that Clarence had never quite caught up to it. He still set 2 cups out in the morning sometimes before he remembered. After Margaret, he had stepped back from the company. His son-in-law, his daughter Nadia's husband, had assumed the chair. The board had been gentle about it. Clarence had been gentler. He had not known what to do with himself. A man who had spent 40 years building things, managing things, solving things, suddenly with no things to build or manage or solve. His doctor had told him to slow down, to rest, to reconnect. His daughter Nadia had said, "Dad, just go outside. Go be in the world for a while." Not the business world, the actual world. He had put on his old army jacket, the one he'd had for 30 years, the one Margaret had called distinguished looking in a way that meant she loved it, and he had started walking. Every Tuesday, he walked from his house in Rosedale down to Dufferin, a long walk, 90 minutes, because he liked the transition of the city, the way it changed block by block. He had been walking past the laundromat when the woman inside saw him through the glass, came out and handed him a meat pie without being asked. He had sat on the bench and eaten it and thought, I haven't tasted food that felt like that in a long time. He came back the next week, and the week after that. He did not tell her who he was, not because he was hiding it, but because he had learned, in 30 years of being wealthy, that money announces itself before you can say anything real, and he wanted to say something real first. While Clarence was learning what the world looked like from a bench on Dufferin, something else was happening. The developer who had made offers along the street was a man named Paul Greer. He was 44, sharp, the kind of man who used the word density as a compliment. He had been buying up commercial leases along a 3-block stretch of Dufferin for 8 months, quietly, through a numbered company. His pitch to building owners was simple. Significant improvements to the corridor's value profile, but first a clean commercial slate. No legacy tenants. No old laundromats or barbershops or West Indian grocery stores. A new vision. Paul Greer had, 3 weeks before Zola received her letter, made an offer on her building to Dennis Farrow. The offer was $1.4 million. Farrow had accepted the same afternoon. What Paul Greer did not know, what nobody on that street yet knew, was that Clarence Whitfield had walked that same block every Tuesday for 3 months, and had noticed the way a man who has spent 40 years in property development cannot help but notice exactly what was happening to it. He also knew Paul Greer. Not well enough. Zola did not sleep the night after the 60-day clock started. She lay in the dark and ran the numbers she already knew by heart. Application fees for a new commercial space, first and last, build out equipment. She could not do it. Even if she found a space, which in this market at this rent level was nearly impossible, she could not do it. She could hear her mother's gospel, quiet through the wall. Ifua always played it low late at night, like a nightlight for the soul. Mama, Zola called softly. A pause. Yes, my daughter. Are you awake? I'm old. I'm always awake. Zola got up and went to her mother's room. She sat on the edge of the bed. The street light came through the curtains and made the room amber. She told her mother everything. This time she didn't protect her from it. Ifua listened without interrupting, which was unusual. When Zola finished, her mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Your father, when we were about to lose everything in 2001, he sat exactly where you are sitting now. Same posture, same face. She smiled in the amber light. He looked like he was about to fight the entire world. Was he scared? Terrified, Ifua said. But that never stopped him doing the next thing. She reached over and cupped Zola's face in her stiff hands. A seed doesn't need to see the sun to grow, my daughter. It just needs to do what a seed does. And what you do is you open every morning and you run those machines, and you give people their last meat pie, and you trust that the ground knows what it's doing. Zola covered her mother's hands with her own. What if the ground lets me down this time, Mama? Ifua thought about this seriously, which Zola appreciated. Then she said, Then we find new ground. But I don't think we will. On the Tuesday 6 days before Zola's lease ran out, she didn't have a meat pie. She hadn't been to the bakery. She hadn't had the heart. She was outside the laundromat at 7, sweeping the sidewalk, more out of habit than hope, when she heard a car pull up. Not just a car. A Lexus SUV, dark gray, quiet engine, the kind of car that costs more than she'd made in 3 years. A woman got out from the passenger side. 40s, natural hair, a tailored coat, the kind of easy confidence that comes from having always been taken seriously. She opened the back door. Clarence got out, not in his army jacket, in a wool coat, charcoal, well cut, shoes that were not old sneakers. He looked like himself and also like a completely different man. Zola stood with her broom and stared. The woman beside him handed him a leather folder. He walked across the sidewalk to where Zola stood. The woman stayed by the car. Zola, he said, Clarence. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Who are you?" He opened the folder. "My name is Clarence Whitfield. I'm a property developer. Retired, mostly." He pulled out a document and held it out. She took it. "Read the first paragraph. Read it again." As of Friday morning, he had purchased the building at this address and 3 adjacent buildings on the block through Whitfield Properties. He had paid $1.9 million. For hers, $500,000 more than Paul Greer had offered Farrow. The offer had been made Saturday. The paperwork had closed Monday. Zola looked up. Her hands were not quite steady. "I don't understand." He took the document gently from her and turned to the second page. "This is your new lease. 15 years, fixed rent, below market, with a right of first purchase if the building is ever sold." He pointed to a line near the bottom. "And this is the capital improvement allocation. For ventilation, boiler replacement, and whatever else this building needs that it hasn't gotten." Zola could not speak. "The Great Lakes water stain," she managed finally, "in the back room." "First on the list," Clarence said. She put her hand over her mouth. She was not going to cry in front of a man she had fed meat pies to for 3 months. She was absolutely not going to do that, she cried. Clarence waited. He had the patience of a man who had built things and understood that the best things took time to settle. When she could speak, she said, "Clarence, why?" He closed the folder. "Because you gave me your lunch every Tuesday for 3 months, he said, when you had $7 in your wallet, when you were going home hungry. You didn't do it for credit. You didn't do it because I was important. You did it because I was there and you had food, and that, in your understanding of the world, was sufficient reason." His voice was steady, but his eyes weren't. "My wife," he said, "used to say that the measure of a person isn't what they give from their surplus. It's what they give from their last." He paused. "She would have liked you very much." Zola pressed her fingers to her eyes. She heard from above the faint sound of her mother's gospel through the window. Always too loud. "What about Paul Greer?" she asked. Clarence's expression shifted, just slightly. "Paul Greer had plans for this block. He no longer has the inventory to execute them. He will, I expect, redirect his energies elsewhere. And Dennis Farrow is no longer anyone's landlord on this street. He accepted my offer inside of 48 hours, which tells you everything you need to know about how committed he was to his so-called renovations." A small woman had come to stand in the doorway of the laundromat above. Ifua Asante, 63 years old, in her house slippers and her good housecoat, looking down at the street with the focused attention of a woman who suspects something significant is happening and intends to witness it. Zola looked up at her. "Mama." Ifua looked at Clarence. She looked at the Lexus. She looked at her daughter's face. "I told you," she said, from up in the doorway, "that the ground knows what it's doing." Then she went back inside to turn her gospel up. The woman by the car, Clarence's daughter Nadia, as it turned out, made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob. Somewhere in between. The street was starting to fill up. Morning traffic, the transit bus, a woman walking a very small dog. Ordinary Tuesday. And in the middle of it, Zola Asante stood in front of her laundromat on Dufferin Street, holding a 15-year lease, crying in a way that felt like relief and exhaustion, and something that might be the beginning of joy. Clarence did not rush anything. He had learned, through loss, that the best things had to arrive in their own time. He started with the things that mattered most. The boiler was replaced in May. The ventilation above the dryers was fixed the same week. A contractor came for the water stain and found, behind the drywall, a pipe that had been leaking for probably 2 years. Clarence's people fixed all of it without being asked twice. Ifua's hip surgery, Zola had never mentioned it to him. But Nadia had quietly asked, and Zola had told her more than she'd meant to, was expedited through a specialist clinic Clarence knew. not as charity, as a patient with proper care. The surgery happened in June. 6 weeks later, Ifua walked down the stairs to the laundromat for the first time in 8 months. She stood in the doorway and looked at the machines and the sunflower mural and the shelf of single orphaned socks. "This is a good place," she told Zola. "Your father would have said the same." Zola hugged her from behind and didn't say anything. Some things don't need words. In July, the drop-off service launched. Zola hired 2 women, Priya, who had 3 kids and needed hours that ended by 3, and Sandra, who had come to Canada from Nigeria the year before and was still finding her footing. She trained them herself. She paid them properly. The 3 free machines for shelter residents started the same week. The women's shelter 4 blocks over sent a coordinator named Kim to arrange a schedule. Kim cried a little at the intake meeting. Zola handed her a meat pie from the bakery. "There's always 2, Zola said. "One for you. There is one more thing, because there always is." Dennis Farrow came into the laundromat on a Wednesday afternoon in August. He looked diminished somehow, which is what happens to certain people when the thing propping them up is taken away. The building's income had been nearly half his retirement plan. He hadn't had another plan. He stood inside the door. He wasn't quite meeting her eyes. Zola was folding a customer's shirts at the counter. She saw him. She didn't move. "Mr. Farrow." He looked at the floor. "I know I don't have any right to be here. I know what I did. He stopped. He looked very tired. "I walked past and I smelled the detergent, and I used to bring my laundry here years ago before I owned the building. When my wife was still alive." He stopped again. "I don't know why I came in." Zola looked at this man who had given her 60 days to disappear, who had signed a paper without a second thought that would have ended her livelihood, displaced her sick mother, undone everything her father's 11 years of night shifts had made possible. She could have asked him to leave. She had every right. She put down the shirt she was folding. She took 2 tokens from the change dispenser. She set them on the counter in front of him. "Machine 4 is free," she said. "There's soap on the shelf. Leave your clothes when they're done. I'll fold them." He stared at the tokens. "Why?" he said. "Why would you?" Zola picked up the shirt again. "Because laundry needs washing," she said. "And you're here. It's not complicated." He took the tokens. He sat in the plastic chair by machine 4 and put his head in his hands and stayed like that for a long time before he got up and started a load. He came back the next Wednesday, and the one after that. He never said much. He washed his clothes, and sometimes he folded other people's from the dryers without being asked, because he needed something to do with his hands. Some people learn slowly. Some lessons only land when everything else has been stripped away. But the ones that come in warm and smell like clean laundry and were given by someone who had every reason not to give them, those stick. As for Clarence and Zola, he did not rush that either. They kept their Tuesday mornings. Bench, meat pie, coffee. Now the meat pies were from a better bakery because Clarence had discovered one on his walk and brought them himself. Zola refused to tell him if they were better than hers. She was not ready to concede that point. He asked her, on a Tuesday in September, if she would have dinner with him. Not as a business meeting. As 2 people who had been sitting on a bench every week for 6 months and might like to sit across a table for once. She said yes. He was terrible at ordering in restaurants. He second-guessed everything and asked the server too many questions and apologized for it, after in a way that was so sincere, Zola laughed. "You built $900 million of property," she said, "and you can't order salmon without cross-examining the waiter. Margaret used to order for both of us," he said. "I was completely useless without her." He said it easily, the way people say true things when they've stopped being afraid of them. Zola appreciated that. My mother still sets a plate for my father on Sundays, she said. She doesn't explain it. She just does it. Clarence nodded. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You're a remarkable woman, Zola Asante." "I'm a woman with a laundromat," she said. "You're a woman who keeps the last machine running for someone who can't afford a token. There is nothing ordinary about that." She looked at him across the table. This man who had sat on a bench for 3 months to find something real, who had walked for 90 minutes every Tuesday to be in the actual world, who still set out 2 cups some mornings and had learned to live with that. "Eat your salmon, Clarence," she said. He ate it. And for the first time in a long time, neither of them felt like they were eating alone. Nydia hosted the Sunday dinner where Zola met the family properly. Clarence's son flew in from Vancouver. Ifua came and sat at the head of the table in her good dress, and by the end of the evening was in the kitchen showing Nadia's husband how to make contomayor stew with his eyes closed. Clarence stood in the doorway of the kitchen, watching his daughter laugh, and Zola's mother gesticulate with a wooden spoon, and Zola herself across the room, talking to his son like they had known each other for years. He thought about Margaret. He always thought about Margaret. But the thought was different now, softer at the edges. "You would have loved this," he told her quietly. He believed she heard him. "There is a bench outside a laundromat on Dufferin Street in Toronto. If you walk by on a Tuesday morning, you might see it empty, or you might see 2 people sitting on it, eating meat pies from the good bakery, talking about nothing and everything. The woman runs the machines inside. She comes from Kumasi, by way of 9 years old, by way of every night shift her father ever worked, by way of a mother who plays gospel too loud and says the ground knows what it's doing. She gives away her last meat pie every week, not because she has plenty, because she has purpose, and the pot, as any woman from Kumasi can tell you, has never once been empty.